The following is a conversation with Dr. James Fishelson, former mobility research manager at Ford and now the executive director of the California Partners for Advanced Transportation Technology, also known as PATH at UC Berkeley. Dr. Fishelson earned his PhD in urban and regional planning at the University of Michigan and a degree in chemistry and international studies at Yale University. During his time as a mobility research manager at Ford, he led a team of researchers and scientists with backgrounds in transportation engineering, data science, urban planning, and optimization, focusing on modeling the impacts of new mobility solutions from nano to macroscopic scales across different cities. Now, his work focuses on a variety of new and innovative mobility areas, including autonomous technology, simulators, travel demand modeling, geofencing, commercial fleets, 3D virtual displays, and many more. Hello, this is episode 2 of the No Limits podcast, where we talk about all things engineering, science related, and life. Here I have with me Dr. James Fishelson. Thank you so much for joining with me today in my second episode.
Oh, so happy to be here.
Yeah, so tell me, so right now we're actually in PATH, which stands for the Partners for Advanced Transportation Technology in California. And so, yeah, tell me more about like what PATH and, you know, what its attributes are and what its goals we want to achieve here at UC Berkeley.
Of course. So PATH is one of the, probably the oldest research center in the nation that is explicitly focused on advanced transportation technologies. And so we are only about 2 years away from our 40th anniversary, which is very exciting. I'm not sure if you noticed, my dad did immediately when I took this job, that about a year and a half ago, that PATH and Partners for Advanced Transportation Technologies do not match up specifically. Where the heck is the H coming from? Now, that was a legitimate question. And it turns out that's because we're so gosh darn old that we've actually gone through a number of different name changes. Originally, it was one of the original versions was Partners for Advanced Transit and Highways. Then but in my mind, that's more indicative of just how long we've been in this space. So though the name might have shifted a little bit, our mission has absolutely not. Our goal was and always will be to be doing work on these advanced transportation technologies, whatever they may be, automation, connectivity, drones, etc., and taking them from the research and laboratory setting here at Berkeley towards the real world. So, for example, one of our biggest partners is Caltrans. So one of our biggest goals is finding ways to deploy a lot of these new technologies on the roads in the ways that increase equity, sustainability, improve travel times, reduce congestion, et cetera, et cetera.
That makes sense because, you know, now with all these advanced technologies and AI, we have to adapt, right, to not even just highways. You know, transportation, what is that? It's such a broad term now. And with all these technologies, it's not necessarily encompassing only highways and, you know, the traditional roadways that you would normally see. Exactly.
So one of the really big areas that we work on, along with many other people now, it's called digital infrastructure. So it's basically the idea that you have this physical hard infrastructure on the road, the actual pavements, the traffic signals, et cetera. But then you're also going to have this underlying digital infrastructure that can be supported by AI, digital twins, et cetera, that are really necessary to the functioning of a, high-performing transportation network.
Yeah, you know, digital twins, I'm definitely familiar with that since I've heard that kind of thrown around the past few years. And do you think that is, the connection that we need as far as getting the connectivity of V2X, V2V, which to viewers out there who are unfamiliar with V2X or V2V, it stands for vehicle to everything, vehicle to vehicle infrastructure. And the hope is to get all these technologies connected.
Short answer, yes. Longer answer is the devil is always in the details. So this is one of our biggest challenges in general. Anytime you're going from like a research framing where you need to be very, very specific and very narrow and very technical, and only about 5 people in the world understand what the heck you're talking about, and then bringing it to the real world, that translation effort is really difficult. So oftentimes what we'll end up doing is using generic terms to describe a field, which is helpful, but it doesn't actually tell us what we're doing. So digital infrastructure is that. When you say simulation, it's like that. Digital twin is like that. So Yes, digital twins can be super useful, but digital twin is a very broad term, and it could mean a whole bunch of things. So in general, a digital twin basically means we need to create a virtual environment that accurately represents, that twins what the physical environment is. Typically, digital twins imply that you can run simulations on them in real time or equivalent. So very often when folks say digital twins, especially in the transportation context, they'll mean that there's going to be the fixed aspects of the platform, or fixed aspects of the twin, which would be, like this is where the roads are, this is where the trees are, etc. And then there would also be the dynamic aspect where these are where the cars are. Now, those cars could be simulated, or those cars could be representative of real world traffic. But depending on what you're trying to do, you want very different digital twins. So one of the biggest uses for digital twins now is with companies that are using developing autonomous vehicle technologies, that AVs, now tell me if you want to, please interrupt me at any point in time. So one of the big issues with AVs, right, is safety. And it turns out it's at a technical level. Here at Path, we were running demonstrations of fully autonomous vehicles way back in the 1990s. It is very achievable to do. And oftentimes it's not a pure technical problem just to do it in a demo context.
We just visited the Path Research Center. Where was it? In Richmond, right?
Richmond Field Station. You still really saw some of those vehicles that were like very classic, like 1996 Buick LeSabres that we were using for these trials.
We were also talking about the engines of different cars, but it was really cool to get to see the old version, the Pontiac. Actually, my very first car was a Pontiac, but now they're out of business. But it was really interesting to see.
Yeah, Pontiacs are fun cars.
They are, but it didn't really work too well. It did save my life, though.
Oh, good.
Actually, I got in a crash, and it was
Which one did you have?
It was a Pontiac G6.
Oh, well, it wasn't the Aztec?
No, I'm not that cool.
Oh, that's famously the ugly, you know the one I'm talking about?
I don't think so,
Oh, yeah, that's the Walter White car. I actually kind of like them, too.
Yeah.
Okay, but no, so with AVs, the thing is, so you got in the car crash, you were saying, right? And that was really scary.
It was, yeah.
And numbers go up and down, but I think I want to say the most recent numbers were about 43,000 people die every year in an automobile collision in the U.S. Now that sounds incredibly unsafe, right? But and it is. And that's a very sad number. But at the same time, we also drive a ridiculous amount in this country. And there's a lot of people. So 43,000 sounds like a huge number. It equates to, give or take, about one death every 100 million miles plus that are driven. So that's a lot, but it's actually a pretty rare occurrence considering all the vehicles that are on the road, just how often a fatality occurs. And oftentimes the numbers are highly skewed, of course, where things like late night driving, the age of the driver, and where they're located, but most importantly, level of sobriety of one of the participants in the crash plays a huge role. So compared to, say, which is what most autonomous vehicles are doing, compared to a sober driver in typical situations, it's even less likely that a car is going to get into a crash. And so it's really hard to test safety in a real world environment because unsafe situations, even near miss situations, don't strictly happen that frequently. And moreover, you don't want to be testing in a real world environment where waiting for people to die, see what's been going on. No, not death, but see what's been going on with Cruise, see what happened with Uber when they basically shuttered their entire AV system soon after they had a fatality. So
that's crazy. It's all in media too. And even when you do research or when you have to hire dummies, that's costly try to mimic that environment.
Hence, one of the biggest uses that you're seeing for digital twins is testing AV operations and testing basically what different companies will call different things. When I was back at Ford, we called it the virtual driver system. Basically testing the brain of the car in how it will work in a whole host of situations. often, and then nice thing about digital twin is you can toss in as many weird ones as you want. So this would be like, well, what happens if a turkey flies across the road? Very often, these are the big risks. Is you need to start planning around what are called edge case scenarios, basically unlikely situations. So one last little story on this. Here at Path, I was talking with one of the founders of Path, who is still emeritus here, Steve Schladover. We're actually going to see him at the keynote at the Haas Summit in a little bit. He was saying, yeah, I was a part of the first ever autonomous vehicle crash.
So cool.
And he's like, what happened? It's like, well, we were doing this demo, and it was before the full live demo. So I think it was in 96 with the big one was in 97. And everyone was safe. It was like a 3-mile-an-hour fender bender. But what happened was, so these vehicles were in platooning formation, which means that they travel really close to each other.
Yeah.
That helps increase roadway capacity, and it decreases it decreases overall emissions and fuel usage because you get reduced. Basically, it's like if you're in NASCAR or something, you're drafting off the car in front of you. And so that was cool. And they were just starting out, and the following car crashed into the front car because what happened was the light hit again, 90s, older cars, the light hit hit a bit of chrome on the bumper in a particular way, shot into the camera.
Wow.
And as a result, the camera perceived that there was no car in front of it because it just saw white. And so it rammed into the car in front of it. It didn't stop appropriately. And that's crazy. That's actually like a number of Tesla crashes have had similar issues with vision-based cameras, or that's what... Do not take that as legal guidance because there's a lot of lawsuits around it, but that appears from the outside to be what happened.
Interesting. And to the viewers, just to remind the viewers, James, Dr. James Fishelson, who's now the executive director at Path, formerly he worked at Ford. And so all the experiences and the things that he's talking about right now come from that and ideas. So could you share with me some of the experiences as it relates to Ford Motors, and did you guys do any testings for safety or?
Yeah. So I led the mobility research team at Ford. And so Ford is a huge company, like most of the OEMs. I think the total employees are about 300,000 or so, and it's similar at GM.
But wasn't it the first motor company, big motor company, General, General Ford?
It depends on how you. Yes, it depends on
1920s, right?
Starting in the teens, but the 1920s, the big one was the Model T.
I read a little bit on General Ford.
Oh yeah. So it's Ford has a long history in automotive.
Yeah.
The big thing that they're known for is the production line with the Model T and producing the first affordable vehicle. So before Ford, there were plenty of automobiles out there. Generally, Mercedes-Benz is typically attributed to be the first major auto manufacturer that is still in operation. And they started, I want to say their first vehicle was actually in the 1899 or something like that. And it was this little 3-seat, three-wheel, mechanical, 1 horsepower tricycle or something like that. But that was the first. Ford's biggest innovation, what they're most known for, is starting the production line with the Model T so that they would be able to sell cars in a way that regular people could purchase, whereas before cars were mostly for some specific farming uses and for the wealthy, but not for regular people.
I'm curious, do you think that the direction of how vehicles are designed, both the interior and exterior and the safety functionality, is heading in the right direction?
I would dispute the question of right or wrong.
That's a good okay.
I think all of the actors in this space have their own needs and concerns. So I like to speak from the OEM perspective a little bit. These are very risk-averse companies for very understandable reasons. Now, they're trying to make it go faster, but to build a vehicle, it takes billions oftentimes of dollars of investment, especially if it's an electric vehicle or something like that.
Yeah.
And a new vehicle line could take easily 5 years from when it is envisioned to when you can actually buy a car. So this is much longer timelines than, like, say, the tech world is used to. And these are necessary because vehicle design, it's incredibly complicated. It's not strictly complex. It's a very known problem when you're making a traditional vehicle, what needs to happen to make it work right.
Yeah.
But there are hundreds of thousands of parts that go into it. So when I first started at Ford, I remember one of my friends, he was telling me about his previous job. And his job, he spent 6 months on a research project that was testing the appropriate mesh size for the air conditioning system. And I was like, this is boring as heck. And he's like, no, it's necessary. What do you mean? Well, look, if it's too small, then the pump has to work too hard and it's not efficient and we can't cool the vehicle efficiently. But if the holes are too big, then it turns out pine needles can get through and that creates a fire risk. We still think of Ford is still known for the Pinto, which did catch on fire, but it was 50 plus years ago, only in very, very specific situations.
Yeah.
So these and if there is something that puts people in danger, billions of dollars in liability are there for the car companies. So they, almost by definition, need to be very cautious.
Yeah.
That's one. Additionally, with the car companies, within the U.S. context in particular, one thing to be aware of is that when you buy it, so you don't have a car anymore, right?
Yeah, I gave up the vehicle to be full bicycle.
So, but what was the car you had before that?
Tacoma.
Okay.
Tacoma.
And have you or your folks ever bought a new car?
No, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you buy a new car, you don't buy it from Ford. You buy it from a Ford dealer, which are not the same business entity. And that creates a lot of, now that this started 70 years ago where, it was hard to advertise. How do you know? So like if Ford wanted to sell, you needed to have a dealer who would sell your car for you. It makes perfect sense. But now, especially as we're moving more towards software-focused systems, it becomes a huge challenge where the dealers have very different incentives than the OEM does. That actually really substantially impacts overall uptake. One of the biggest innovations that Tesla made is pushing for more of a direct sales model, which has its own set of issues. But so when you buy a Tesla from Tesla. When you buy a Ford, I buy it from my local Ford dealer. And my Ford dealer may not want to sell me an electric vehicle because they can't make as much money on the electric vehicle because electric vehicles don't require as much maintenance. So you have all of these factors that start, and then the other part I would mention here is it impacts, because that dealer model also impacts what Ford can put into vehicles. So many of these, so it's harder for them to sell software updates in the same way because they were not the one who were actually selling you the car, but a lot of OEMs are working to do OTAs, over-the-air updates, and other things where they can monetize that.
Yeah.
But additionally, they're always very cognizant of this dealer model and what it's going to take to get these new technologies in vehicles. So, for example, with safety, because that's what you were asking about.
Yeah.
So, for the listeners, the connected vehicle technology, it's basically a way for cars to talk to each other, talk to the infrastructure, talk to traffic signals, talk to other cell phones, etc. And it has been shown to have really big potential safety improvements in lots of different situations.
Yes, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
It seems like the market is shifting in all directions in many different fields in autonomous vehicles. So not only safety, but you mentioned the OEMs and the dealers. I mean, and in some of the research that I've read, we're even thinking about like certain business models. There's like shared autonomous vehicle systems where, you think of Uber and Lyft, but this time, you're not going to have a physical driver, and that's a different business model. And there's also the use case of like, we may not even need to own a vehicle.
And these are unproven business models.
They are unproven.
And that's one of the challenges.
Yeah.
So what I was saying before.
Yeah.
So for example, like, there's a huge societal benefit. And you see this all the time in transportation. This is things that we should be doing as a society because it benefits everybody.
Yeah.
But there may not be a business case for it. So if all of the vehicles are connected, it's really easy to envision a better future.
Yeah.
But it's harder to make those claims at smaller levels. And moreover, people don't want to pay for it. So if you want to put this, so like, let's say the number is, it would be an $800 feature on a vehicle to make each vehicle connected, right? So it's hard now. Not saying no movement has been happening, but it is a big hurdle. Ford doesn't want to swallow that loss. These are not companies that work on particularly big margins. And if the customer doesn't want to pay $800 for their vehicle to be connected, which they do not, Ford is not incentivized to actually install it. This is exactly what we saw happen with seatbelts, that no one bought the seatbelt option, so there weren't seatbelts in cars.
But what ended up happening with the seatbelts was the manufacturers just ended up, okay, we'll just have the seatbelts in here. And there were laws in place, right?
There were mandates. Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah. That was the federal government stepped in and put in mandates. With connectivity, there's other challenges why the federal government doesn't want to step in and place a mandate. And I can honestly understand them.
I think we're heading in that direction, though, because last week, well, potentially, I'm not saying that, like, we are already there. But what I mean by we're heading in that direction potentially is because even last week, the people in the automotive autonomous vehicle industry, didn't they meet with like the Biden administration or...
Okay, so we should be clear. So connectivity can enable automation. They're not strictly the same thing, and this gets a little technical, but basically, like, what Path has traditionally been more on the automated vehicle focus, where we would be assuming that to make the vehicles drive themselves, they need to be to some degree connected to other vehicles and to the infrastructure. A lot of the and this is obviously Continuum. And then a lot of the current AV work, think Zoox and Cruise and Waymo, have been more autonomous versus automated. Autonomous meaning they're like individual isolated agents and they don't need to connect with anybody.
Yeah.
And you're seeing, though, a lot of them even now are moving a little bit in the other direction, realizing that some level of sharing data is helpful, but it's not like we've decided where exactly these have landed. So the big thing we were seeing last week, there was a big announcement that the feds were going to be putting money into connected vehicle research. I would maintain it remains a very open question if they're ever going to put in a mandate, though.
Yeah, AI safety meeting that was happening, right, where they got together to essentially form. Yeah.
So. Yeah, it's an exciting area. It does get a little bit messy.
Yeah, no, and certainly, I think step in the right direction in the fact that we are getting together to talk about AI safety, at least having the discussion, because I think what's even more dangerous is not even having a discussion, not even thinking about it, and allowing these technologies to kind of run wild without ever thinking about it.
Yeah, and so we're at a real inflection point in transportation, and these happened regularly. And if I could, going back to Ford, so this is maybe apocryphal, but and I'm going to butcher it anyway. But at least a famous quote that was attributed to Henry Ford was, "If you asked people what they wanted out of transportation, they would have said a faster horse."
Yeah, I think I saw that. Yeah.
And so it's kind of, but you see this all of the time with any new technology. You see this with cell phones, that people always like to think of the new technology as an improved version of the old technology. And really transformative stuff rarely works that way. It's almost always worse in many, many ways, and more expensive and more difficult. And it's the more but it solves a problem that other people didn't need and they desperately needed no matter what. And the more transformative the technology is, the harder it is to predict. So like, I'm still old enough to remember, when I had flip phones and stuff that, right? And then you're just like, oh, well, what the heck would I use with this first iPhone? This thing is pointless. It sucks at making phone calls and it doesn't hold a charge. So it is so much worse than a flip phone at its basic function of being a phone.
Yeah.
But it can do absolutely everything else. Now that because we have a smartphone, all of a sudden we can start ordering Ubers. That becomes a viable option that wouldn't have been possible with flip phones.
And also the design of how phones have been over the years. You talk about like the flip phone, and then I remember there was the Sidekick, and everybody was raving about Sidekicks. Do you think that people now, if given a Sidekick, would be happy to use it again? Or do you think that because we're so used to using the same kind of visual-looking phone, which is a flat screen, and the reason why I asked that question is because, it kind of goes into all design, all things design, not only cell phones, but vehicles, is the direction of innovative technology and the design of technology for us to want to design to appeal to people in the public right now? Or is it kind of to essentially force people into a direction in which they think they don't know they would like, but eventually they'll become used to it, kind of like what we saw with a cell phone, in which we accepted that.
So there needs to be people who are, this is like more MBA stuff, but this is like the concept of diffusion of innovations and how these innovations get out there. And one of the big ideas is that typically any new technology, you need to find its early adopters. Now, the easiest example of an early adopters are like rich douchebags with money. That's a great early adopter. Oftentimes, it's more complicated than that. But you need to find, it doesn't need to be for everybody, but you need to start by finding a group that is willing to put up with the wonkiness of the new technology and the difficulty and the expense of the new technology because it really makes a difference. So like So, like, for example, this will sound bad. I promise I am making the point, though. A shocking amount of internet technology has been led by the pornography industry, and audiovisual has been led by pornography. Because if you want to watch porn, you are not price sensitive anymore, and you are and it's really important for you to keep so it used to be back in the 50s and 60s, you had to go to a porn movie theater to watch porn.
It's really interesting that you bring up that point because of like people's choice and how they choose to spend their money, what their willingness to choose. You need
to find the people who are willing to put up with all of the other challenges and the expense, because this new technology really scratches that. It really does something for them that nothing else would be able to do. That this is a unique thing that they can help. And it doesn't mean that this is like a life or death situation for them.
Yeah.
But this is going to be like, oh my God, this is going to make my life so much easier. Going back to the automobile again, that's why regional adopters of the automobile. Now, eventually you can find ways to bring the price down, and then it can be for everybody. But to get to that point, you still need to find the early adopters, and those early adopters will lead the system. So going back, so let's get off point. So with cars, one of the origination of the cars was a little bit fascinating.
Yeah.
So early cars, early roads were just horrible, and you couldn't drive on them. And then starting in about the 1880s, you started having macadam roads, which were the first paved roads in the world.
Yeah.
And macadam roads, and this was before the advent of the automobile, macadam roads started because of the 19th century equivalent of yuppies. Basically, rich city folks got really into this newfangled trend of bicycling for pleasure.
Yeah.
And those old bicycles, they literally were called bone rattlers because they didn't have any shocks or anything. So they couldn't drive them easily on rutted roads. So they got the macadam streets for like the rich yuppies of the 19th century to be riding their bicycles. Because those roads were in existence, it then made the adoption of the automobile a lot easier.
Yeah.
Then you looked at who adopted the early automobile. It was rich people. If you ever get a chance, there were some hilarious like 1910 and 20s ads for electric vehicles back in the day where they were advertised as the woman's vehicle.
That's so interesting. I'd like to see that for sure.
Those are, and so you need, or farmers, because they needed to get even though they didn't have as much money, a way that they could get their goods to market a little bit faster than a horse-drawn carriage was a huge benefit for them.
Yeah.
And they needed mechanical skills anyway, so they adopted, tractors and cars probably earlier than most other industries. So the question now for me is, who are going to be the adopters of these new technologies? And my concerns are things like safety that we oftentimes talk about. how these transportation improvements will better society. And I deeply believe in that and think that is a goal that we in the field should be pushing towards. But I don't think that is a deployment pathway, because selling a safer car is not a great sales pitch. It's not nothing, but if it were a really good sales pitch, Volvo would have a bigger market share than they do.
Yeah, and kind of the point that you mentioned earlier about Cruise and the crashes, about 45,000 crashes a year, which, to some can argue is a high number, to others, as you mentioned, is low relatively compared to the amount of vehicles that are on the roadway. And then when you get an accident on the roadway, that's autonomous vehicles, it's like blown up on the news and like, oh my gosh, do we have but these things happen, right? It's not that we want them to happen. We want to prevent it as much as possible, but it is important to think about to these certain types of technologies. And so, no, thank you. Thank you for all the points that you shared. I think they're very important in regards to autonomous vehicle safety, how we think about transportation as a whole, not just highways and transit. And then also, who are the early adopters? Who are these people that are going to take these vehicles into our society and how we use them? So one more question that I want to ask you is, what keeps you up at night? And also, I know that you recently told me that you're a father, so congratulations on your first child. And how is that like, balancing? I guess there's two questions, right? Like balancing your life as a scientist and as a new father, and also what keeps you up at night?
Rory used to keep me up at night, but thankfully he finally just started sleeping through the night as of like a month or two ago. So he's not keeping me up in the middle of the night anymore either. That's good. Yeah, I mean, that's the fatherhood thing. That's something we all struggle with, is finding ways to create a little bit of work-life balance and to find time for the family. And it's hard. And I think we do the best we can. Honestly, what helps me is realizing now that when I'm doing, I think it's hard, but it's the only thing that makes it a little easier for me now is realizing that I need to set this have some work-life balance, not just for me, but also to set an example for everyone else that I work with. When you get into a little bit more of a position of authority, it's that like, I don't want everyone else at Path to think that working through every single weekend is how you should be working, because that's not healthy. So that's been helpful for me. I'm
curious about that though, and it's weird because I feel like I form like an opinion that's like quite different, but not to say that I'm all about like being a workaholic or anything, but I don't know if I believe in work-life balance in the sense that it's although it can be achievable depending on how you look at it, but it always fluctuates. Life is always fluctuating, right? And so, like, are we striving for a constant balance? Because technically, I don't think that's really the case.
No, I think that it's just you need to.
And the thing is that if you're really passionate in something, passionate about family, passionate about science, there's always going to be fluctuations, give or take. And so I'm really curious what your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I think it is. This becomes a difficult question. So I would say, though, in my mind, there are really two factors. One, and this is, and I'm impacted by both. One is, for me, when I say work-life balance, I actually think that improves the work that I can do. And that's not, so like, I'm still going to be a workaholic. I'm still going to be working too many hours. But like right now, I feel that, say, like my work has suffered over the past few months, in part because I haven't been able to maintain a work-life balance. And it's almost like I'm working without a safety net a little bit. And that is not strictly a good thing. That the kind of work that's like, if I have a little bit more, live in actual life, say, take time to actually use your transportation system and travel and not just be stuck in an office, that actually makes my work a little bit better too. And then the second thing, and I've seen this, so you see this in tech, you see this a lot at a unit, like Berkeley is a top-ranked university in engineering. So I think we actually then, as a result, one of the challenges is we can push away some really good people if one of the standards for doing a good job is being able to work 75 hours a week. And that doesn't mean that some people can't do it, but I think about like a lot of the professors that I know, or even going back, like a lot of the more successful, like folks at Ford I knew, one of their one of the features that they all shared was they were all workaholics. And I'm like, well, I actually personally don't believe that's necessarily a good thing. Because like, well, what happens if there's somebody who is exceptional and has wonderful, new, bright ideas? This is part of the concept of you want diversity in any organization. And if you expect workaholism, I think it's bad for people, but I also think it's bad for the organization because it prevents you from getting the diversity that you might want.
Yeah.
There's plenty of great people who do awesome work who don't want or are able to do high quality work for more than 30 or 40 hours a week.
No, definitely. And I think I kind of alluded to that as well in our coffee conversation previously, where especially like women in engineering, the diversity, not even just in race, but diversity in gender, but also our roles in life. And hopefully someday, I mean, I don't have a family yet, but that's something that I'm considering and thinking about. I would like to see women, unfortunately, a lot of the case, because when we climb up the ladder, we have to make that choice of giving up that ladder. But I want to actually prove that you can do both.
You can. It's hard. And that's what I mean, though, like setting the expectations for people and setting the standard. So is really, really important. So like what I'm thinking of, so my wife and one of my friends, they're both college professors. My wife is an anthropology professor, my friend is a chemistry professor. And both of them were saying, we're trying to set the standard. My friend is like, look, I want to teach like women that they can be, and my friend who's in chemistry, I want to teach women that they can have successful careers in STEM. And if I'm setting the standard that you need to be working 75 hours a week and you need to be in the lab 6 to 7 days a week.
Yeah.
That's going to prevent a lot of people from joining, because that's like,
I can't bring my child to the lab.
Well, you can do that, but no. Like when you have
obviously
kids,
for like
your
safety,
time, your time gets. You can't work okay. Either you can't work as many hours, or you have to be phenomenally wealthy to be able to afford enough childcare, or to make enough money that you have a stay-at-home spouse. And in this society, it's much more likely that the stay-at-home spouse still is going to be, it is going to be the woman. So it is, it's something you can try to do, and some people do, but you think like this gets to the Sheryl Sandberg, like lean in type stuff. It's like, yeah, it's doable. But if you're C-suite level type person and have infinite dollars and can pay for lots and lots of nanny care, then it is. But if you're working like jobs like mine that pay moderately well, we're good, but are not infinite dollars that like I can't afford to have a full-time staff at my house or anything like that, you are pushing a lot of these people away across, this isn't just women, it's not just, but you're pushing a lot of people away who may have other obligations outside of work that they can't get to. And the other one is if you are, it's hard though. So like that's what my friend said. My wife was mentioning, so she's a professor, she's going up for tenure shortly. And she's like, and she was saying like, it's nice. A lot of universities have started giving good paternity leave. And one of the ideas of them giving paternity leave is, well, it shouldn't be all on the mother to be providing all the childcare. The dad should be contributing too. But she said, yeah, it turns out that system hasn't been working as well, because
in America, for sure.
In America, no, this is only within the with the professor. So of course they're academics. They then study this. And it turns out that it actually increases the gender disparity by giving paternity leave, because what happens is women take, on average, women will take their maternity leave and will be resting and recuperating and healing their body and breastfeeding. And men will take the paternity leave to do some of the childcare work, but also basically treat it as a free, writing semester, where they'll take their semester of paternity leave and they'll do some childcare work. But they'll
being a father, then I think it's great that men have the equal opportunity to be able to care for their child. But if they're going to use it foolishly like that, a great opportunity, which is to give more time to their child, which I commend the system for allowing that option for the father. But then that's purely just on them and the child, unfortunately,
Well, I mean, this is what I would say in that case is like, no, I'm sure they were helping out. But they would, they would help out for 20 hours a week, and that left them a whole other 40 hours a week to do, to be working on their next book or something like that. And it's just hard. But okay, we should wrap up.
So the last question, which is what keeps you up at night? Because you answered the work-life balance thing, which is great. But yeah, curious now.
So I'll go back. So my advisor, my PhD was in Michigan, and my advisor at Michigan actually was a Berkeley grad from way back when, and a Berkeley PhD grad from way back when. And one of the things he said that it's always stuck with me is that in this country, sometimes we like to think that taking our hands off and doing nothing is a neutral choice. It isn't. It's a very active choice. You are deciding to continue the system that we have if you say we don't want to change anything. And do not presume that we are in this, tabula rasa scenario where this happened naturally. It did not happen naturally, especially in transportation and urban planning. The cities that we have and the transportation system that we have now are the results of many choices that have been made over hundreds of years. So what keeps me up at night is I worry that we as a society are not being proactive in the transportation space, and I worry that it's not going to change, because I would like to see us, especially at the federal level, pick more winners, say this is the direction that we need the transportation system to be going in, and this is where we want to be pushing the technology. And that's hard for government to do because you're almost trying to predict the future. It's a difficult thing. I 100% recognize that. But my biggest fear, what keeps me up at night, is that a lot of these new transportation technologies that we have, if we don't do anything as a society, and this is hard because you need to find this, why I meant with deployment, you need to find actual deployment pathways, people who are willing to pay for it, businesses that will benefit from it, et cetera. If we don't do anything, we're going to perpetuate a lot of the worst aspects of our current transportation system. So we're going to, for example, one of the biggest concerns is as automated vehicles keep on being deployed, is it going to be with some of the newer business models like sharing that you were talking about, connection to transit, et cetera? Or is it going to be more of the typical norm in the US, which is private vehicles? So 90-ish in the US, 90-ish% of all non-walking trips are done via private vehicle. So basically transit, bikes, et cetera, at the entire US level are basically rounding errors in the transportation system. It's mostly you are driven around by private vehicles. So if we continue that, and I say this as somebody who loves cars. I have a 1938 Dodge at home. It's how I got into transportation. I have no desire for people to get rid of their private cars. We need to keep it. But I'm concerned that we may be exacerbating some of the worst tendencies, that automated vehicles will let people drive more congestion on the roads, more emissions. They'll increase inequality because then only certain people will be able to afford the autonomous vehicles. They will then live further out. They will then make it more expensive for everybody else who already lives further out, and it will make life worse for everybody. And that's what keeps me up at night is, are we just, am I going to wake up in 30 years and I'm ready to retire and I look at the transportation system and has more advanced technology in it, and it's worse for society than the one I grew up with? That's what I get scared of.
Dr. James Fishelson, thank you so much for joining me in this podcast, the No Limits podcast, where we talk about all things engineering and science related. No, I truly appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. We talked about a lot of great topics in autonomous vehicles in general, and safety, which I think are very important, especially in the field of transportation and what we're doing here at PATH. And so thank you so much.
Thank you.